In a laboratory somewhere in Silicon Valley, a team of neuroscientists is mapping every neural pathway in a human brain with unprecedented precision. Each synapse, each electrical impulse, each biochemical reaction is being recorded and digitized. Their goal sounds like something ripped from a science fiction novel. Upload a complete human consciousness into a computer, achieving digital immortality. But here's what will absolutely blow your mind. Despite decades of research and billions in funding, we might be chasing something fundamentally impossible. The promise is intoxicating. Imagine never dying, never aging, never losing your memories to time. Your consciousness could live forever in a digital paradise, thinking at the speed of light, accessing infinite information, existing in virtual worlds limited only by imagination. Tech billionaires are pouring fortunes into this dream. Scientists are dedicating their careers to cracking the code of consciousness itself. Yet beneath this shimmering vision of technological transcendence lurks a paradox so profound it could shatter everything we think we know about minds, machines, and the nature of existence itself. This is the Singularity Paradox, and understanding it will change how you think about consciousness, identity, and what it truly means to be human. What I'm about to reveal challenges the fundamental assumptions driving some of the most ambitious technological projects in human history. We'll explore why the brightest minds in neuroscience and computer science might be pursuing an impossible dream, why consciousness itself might be the one thing that forever eludes our attempts to digitize and transfer it, and why the very nature of being human could be incompatible with the silicon substrate of our digital ambitions. If these are the kinds of questions that keep you curious, take a moment to like this video. And if you want to go deeper into the answers, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Now, prepare yourselves. We begin. Let me paint you a picture of just how close we think we are to achieving this seemingly impossible feat. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others through intricate networks of synapses. These connections fire in patterns of electrical and chemical activity that somehow give rise to thoughts, emotions, memories, and the ineffable experience of consciousness itself. Modern neuroscience has made extraordinary progress in mapping these networks, understanding how information flows through neural pathways, and even predicting certain thoughts and behaviors based on brain activity patterns. Companies like Neuralink are already demonstrating brain-computer interfaces that allow paralyzed patients to control robotic limbs with their thoughts. Advanced brain imaging techniques can now observe individual neurons firing in real time. Supercomputers are simulating neural networks with increasing complexity and sophistication. The trajectory seems clear. We're steadily gaining the tools and knowledge necessary to understand, replicate, and eventually transfer human consciousness. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. In the philosophy of mind, there exists something called the hard problem of consciousness. This isn't just another scientific challenge waiting to be solved through better technology and more research. It's a fundamental question about the nature of subjective experience that might be unsolvable in principle. The hard problem asks why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective, qualitative experiences. Why does seeing red feel like anything at all? Why do we have inner mental lives rather than simply processing information like sophisticated biological computers? This isn't about explaining how the brain works. Neuroscientists have made remarkable progress understanding the neural mechanisms behind perception, memory, decision-making, and behavior. These are what philosophers call the easy problems of consciousness. They're incredibly complex, but they're ultimately about explaining cognitive functions and behaviors that can be observed and measured from the outside. The hard problem is something entirely different. It's about the felt quality of experience itself, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the joy of laughter. These qualia, as philosophers call them, seem to exist in a realm beyond physical description. You can map every neural firing pattern associated with the experience of tasting chocolate, but that map doesn't capture what chocolate actually tastes like to the person eating it. Now, imagine you're trying to upload a mind to a computer. You scan the brain in exquisite detail, capturing every neural connection, every synaptic strength, every pattern of electrical activity. You recreate this entire structure in a digital simulation with perfect fidelity. The simulated brain processes information exactly like the original. It responds to inputs, forms memories, makes decisions, even claims to have conscious experiences. But here's the terrifying question. Is anyone home? The uploaded mind might exhibit all the behaviors we associate with consciousness. It might insist it feels emotions, experiences sensations, and maintains continuity with its biological predecessor. But if consciousness depends on more than just information processing patterns, if it requires something inherent to biological neural tissue that cannot be replicated in silicon, then the upload might be nothing more than an elaborate puppet, a philosophical zombie that acts conscious without actually being conscious. This brings us to the heart of the Singularity Paradox. The same artificial intelligence we expect to achieve superhuman capabilities might simultaneously lack the most basic aspect of human experience: consciousness itself. We fear creating machines too intelligent for us to control, yet these same machines might be fundamentally unconscious, lacking any inner experience whatsoever. But the problems with mind uploading extend far beyond philosophical puzzles about consciousness. The technical challenges alone might be insurmountable. Consider the computational requirements. The human brain operates with an energy efficiency that puts our best supercomputers to shame. Your brain consumes about 20 watts of power while performing the equivalent of an exaflop of computation per second. That's a billion mathematical operations every second, roughly equivalent to the processing power of the world's most advanced supercomputers. But here's the kicker. Those supercomputers require 20 megawatts of power to achieve similar computational throughput. That's 1,000,000 times more energy than your brain uses. Even if we could build computers efficient enough to simulate human consciousness, the energy requirements would be staggering. Current estimates suggest that simulating a single human brain would require between 10 to the 12th and 10 to the 28th floating point operations per second. The range is so enormous because we simply don't understand what level of detail is necessary to capture consciousness. Do we need to simulate every molecule, every quantum interaction? The answer depends on what consciousness actually is, which brings us back to the hard problem. Recent attempts at brain simulation highlight just how far we are from achieving full brain emulation. The most ambitious project, the European Human Brain Project, spent 10 years and €600 million attempting to create a comprehensive model of the human brain. Despite involving 500 scientists and representing one of the largest research efforts in European history, the project failed to achieve its primary goal of completely mapping human brain structure and function. Even more telling, current supercomputers can simulate only tiny fractions of brain activity at realistic speeds. The K supercomputer, once among the world's most powerful machines, could simulate about 1% of the human brain's neural connections, but this simulation ran 400 times slower than real time, meaning that 1 second of brain activity took nearly 7 minutes to compute. These aren't just temporary technological limitations that will be solved by faster computers. The computational complexity of brain simulation might grow exponentially with the level of detail required. If consciousness depends on quantum mechanical processes within neurons, as some theories suggest, then classical computers might be fundamentally incapable of supporting conscious experience, regardless of their processing power. The scanning problem presents another seemingly insurmountable obstacle. To upload a mind, you would first need to map the brain in sufficient detail to capture whatever gives rise to consciousness. Current brain imaging techniques, impressive as they are, fall far short of the resolution and comprehensiveness required. The most detailed brain scans we can currently perform might capture the positions and connections of individual neurons, but they miss vast amounts of information about the dynamic biochemical processes that make those neurons function. The brain operates through incredibly complex interactions between electrical signals, neurotransmitters, hormones, and other chemical messengers. These processes occur at molecular scales and change constantly as the brain processes information and forms new memories. Some companies are exploring more invasive approaches to brain scanning. Nectomy, a startup that emerged from MIT, developed a technique for preserving brains at the nanometer level using a high-tech embalming process. Their method can capture the brain's structure in extraordinary detail, including the complete connectome of synaptic connections between neurons. There's just one small problem with their approach. The preservation process requires the brain to be fresh, which means you have to die first. Nectome's procedure is essentially a form of high-tech suicide with the hope of future resurrection in digital form. The company's slogan might as well be "Death now, consciousness later, maybe." Even if we solve the scanning problem, we face the challenge of understanding what we've scanned. Mapping the brain's structure is like having the blueprint for a building without understanding the purpose of each room or how the electrical and plumbing systems work. The brain isn't just a static network of connections. It's a dynamic system where the strength and efficiency of neural connections constantly change based on experience and activity. These synaptic changes, known as neuroplasticity, are fundamental to how we learn, form memories, and adapt to new situations. A complete brain upload would need to capture not just the current state of every neural connection, but also the rules governing how those connections change over time. This requires understanding learning and memory at a level of detail that current neuroscience hasn't achieved. But perhaps the most fundamental challenge to mind uploading comes from questioning one of its core assumptions: substrate independence. This is the idea that consciousness is essentially software that can run on any sufficiently complex hardware. Just as a computer program can run on different types of processors, the theory goes, consciousness should be able to transfer from biological brains to artificial computers. However, mounting evidence suggests that consciousness might be intimately tied to the specific properties of biological neural tissue in ways that cannot be replicated in silicon-based systems. The brain isn't just a biological computer, it's a living system that depends on precise biochemical processes, hormonal regulation, and complex interactions between neural and bodily systems. Consider the role of neurotransmitters in shaping conscious experience. Serotonin affects mood, dopamine influences motivation and reward processing, and dozens of other chemical messengers modulate different aspects of mental activity. These aren't just signals carrying information between neurons. They're active participants in the process of consciousness itself, altering how neurons respond to inputs and shaping the overall dynamics of brain activity. Digital computers process information through discrete electrical signals that represent binary data. Biological brains use analog processes involving continuously variable concentrations of neurotransmitters, fluctuating electrical potentials, and complex biochemical cascades that unfold over different timescales. The difference isn't just technical, it might be fundamental to how consciousness emerges from neural activity. The embodiment problem adds another layer of complexity to the mind uploading challenge. Human consciousness doesn't exist in isolation. It's shaped by constant interaction with a biological body that provides sensory input, hormonal signals, and feedback from the autonomic nervous system. Your conscious experience of emotions involves not just brain activity, but also changes in heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, and the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. An uploaded mind would lack this rich bodily context. It might process information and make decisions, but would those processes give rise to genuine emotional experiences without the physiological arousal that normally accompanies emotions? Would digital consciousness feel fundamentally hollow or incomplete compared to embodied biological awareness? The timing problem presents yet another obstacle. Neural processes in the brain operate on timescales from microseconds to hours, with different types of information processing happening simultaneously at multiple temporal scales. Digital computers, even the most advanced neuromorphic chips designed to mimic brain function, operate with timing patterns fundamentally different from biological neurons. This timing mismatch might seem like a minor technical detail, but it could be crucial for consciousness. If conscious experience depends on precise temporal coordination between different neural processes, then digital systems with different timing characteristics might be incapable of supporting genuine awareness, even if they can mimic the brain's information processing capabilities. These challenges compound into what might be called the verification problem. Even if we develop technology advanced enough to create digital minds that claim to be conscious, how would we verify their claims? Consciousness is inherently subjective and private. There's no external test that can definitively determine whether a system is truly conscious or simply behaving as if it were conscious. This creates a profound epistemological problem for mind uploading. The uploaded mind might insist it's conscious, maintain memories from its biological predecessor, and exhibit all the behaviors we associate with awareness. But we would have no way to confirm whether anyone is actually home or whether we've simply created an incredibly sophisticated simulation of consciousness without the reality. As we stand on the brink of what many consider the most ambitious technological undertaking in human history, these problems suggest that the dream of digital immortality might forever remain just that: a dream. The very nature of consciousness, with its subjective qualitative aspects that seem to transcend pure information processing, might represent an insurmountable barrier to uploading human minds to machines. But the story doesn't end here. The implications of the Singularity Paradox extend far beyond the technical challenges of mind uploading. They touch on fundamental questions about identity, free will, and what it means to be human in an age of artificial intelligence. The identity problem reveals perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the mind uploading paradox. Even if we somehow solved every technical challenge, scanned brains with perfect precision, and created digital minds indistinguishable from their biological originals, we would still face a philosophical nightmare that strikes at the very core of what it means to be you. Consider this scenario. You undergo the mind uploading procedure. Your brain is scanned, mapped, and perfectly replicated in a quantum computer. The digital version of you awakens with all your memories, personality, and sense of continuous identity intact. From its perspective, the upload was successful. It believes it is you, continuing your life in digital form. But what happened to the original biological you during this process? If the scanning procedure destroyed your biological brain, as many proposed methods would require, then from one perspective, you died. The digital entity might carry on your legacy, but the stream of consciousness that is reading these words right now would have ended. The upload wouldn't be you continuing in a new form. It would be a copy of you beginning its existence while you ceased to exist. This creates what philosophers call the branching problem of personal identity. If both the biological and digital versions of you could exist simultaneously, which one is the real you? Both would have equal claim to your memories, your relationships, your sense of self, yet they would be separate entities with potentially diverging experiences from the moment of uploading. Some theorists argue this isn't actually a problem. They propose that personal identity branches during uploading, with both versions being equally authentic continuations of the original person. Your identity would split like a river flowing around an island, with both streams carrying forward the essential essence of who you are. But this solution creates its own nightmarish implications. If multiple versions of you could exist simultaneously, each with equal claim to being the real you, then the very concept of individual identity begins to break down. You could theoretically create hundreds or thousands of copies of yourself, all convinced they are the original, all possessing your memories and personality. The continuity of consciousness problem cuts even deeper. What makes you you isn't just your memories or personality traits. It's the continuous stream of subjective experience that connects this moment to the next, the felt sense of being a single conscious entity persisting through time. This experiential continuity might be impossible to transfer from one substrate to another. Think about what happens when you fall asleep. Your stream of consciousness breaks, yet you don't consider the person who wakes up to be someone else. This suggests that consciousness can tolerate interruptions while maintaining personal identity. But the interruption during mind uploading would be qualitatively different. It would involve the complete destruction of the biological substrate that supports your conscious experience. Some researchers have proposed gradual replacement approaches to preserve continuity. Instead of scanning and copying the entire brain at once, they suggest slowly replacing biological neurons with artificial ones over time. Each artificial neuron would integrate seamlessly with surrounding biological tissue, gradually shifting the substrate of consciousness from carbon to silicon without any dramatic break in experiential continuity. This approach, sometimes called the Ship of Theseus method after the classical philosophical paradox, faces enormous technical challenges. The artificial neurons would need to interface perfectly with biological tissue, matching not just the electrical properties of natural neurons but also their biochemical interactions. They would need to integrate with the brain's blood supply, respond appropriately to neurotransmitters, and maintain the precise timing relationships essential for neural function. Current attempts at creating artificial neurons fall far short of this level of biological integration. The most advanced neural implants can stimulate brain tissue or record electrical activity, but they operate as foreign objects in the biological environment rather than seamlessly integrated components of neural networks. The idea of replacing billions of neurons while maintaining normal brain function remains pure science fiction. Even if gradual replacement were technically possible, it would raise profound questions about when, exactly, you stop being biological and start being artificial. At what point in the replacement process would your consciousness have transferred to the artificial substrate? Would you notice the transition? Would your subjective experience change as more of your brain became artificial? The seamless transfer problem becomes even more complex when we consider the role of memory in personal identity. Your sense of being a continuous self depends largely on autobiographical memory, the ability to remember your past experiences and connect them to your current moment. But memory itself is not a static recording like a computer file. It's a dynamic, reconstructive process that changes each time you recall an event. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds that memory from scattered neural traces distributed throughout different brain regions. The act of remembering actually changes the memory itself, incorporating new details, emotional coloring, and contextual information from your current state. Your memories are not fixed recordings but living, evolving reconstructions of past experience. This dynamic nature of memory creates problems for mind uploading that go beyond simply transferring stored information. An uploaded mind would need to replicate not just the content of memories but also the complex neural processes that reconstruct and modify those memories during recall. Without this capability, the uploaded consciousness might experience its memories as static, lifeless recordings rather than the rich, emotionally resonant recollections that help define human identity. The social dimension of identity presents another challenge that mind-uploading advocates rarely address. Your sense of self doesn't exist in isolation. It's shaped by relationships with other people, social roles, cultural contexts, and shared experiences that give meaning to your existence. An uploaded mind would face the challenge of maintaining these social connections across a fundamental change in the nature of its existence. How would your friends and family relate to your uploaded version? Would they accept the digital entity as a continuation of their relationship with you, or would they see it as an elaborate memorial to someone who had died? The uploaded mind might possess all your memories of shared experiences, but the other parties to those relationships would need to grapple with questions about whether those bonds could meaningfully continue with a digital entity. The temporal mismatch between digital and biological existence would create additional social challenges. An uploaded mind might think and process information at computer speeds, experiencing subjective years in what biological humans perceive as minutes. This acceleration could make meaningful relationships with biological humans impossible, as the uploaded consciousness would outpace human communication and experience by enormous factors. Alternatively, if uploaded minds were slowed down to match biological thinking speeds to maintain social connections, they would forfeit one of the primary advantages supposedly offered by digital existence. The promise of enhanced cognitive capabilities would be sacrificed for the sake of maintaining human relationships. The economic implications of mind uploading reveal yet another dimension of the identity problem. Current estimates suggest that simulating a human brain would require enormous computational resources and energy consumption. Running a single uploaded mind might cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour in electricity and computing time alone. This economic reality would create a stark divide between uploaded minds that could afford high-quality digital existence and those forced to accept lower-resolution simulations or time-sharing arrangements. Your digital afterlife would depend on your financial resources, creating unprecedented inequalities in the quality of conscious experience itself. Wealthy uploaded minds might enjoy high-resolution simulations with rich sensory experiences and rapid processing speeds, while economically disadvantaged digital consciousnesses might face degraded simulations with limited capabilities and slow thinking speeds. The promise of digital immortality would become a luxury good available only to the wealthy elite. The storage and backup problem adds another layer of complexity to digital identity. Unlike biological consciousness, which exists in the present moment and maintains continuity through time, digital minds would face questions about persistence and backup copies. Would an uploaded mind be stored on servers that could fail? Would backup copies be made? And if so, which version would be considered the real person if the original file became corrupted? These technical considerations have profound implications for identity and continuity. A digital consciousness could potentially be paused, copied, edited, or restored from backup in ways that would be impossible for biological minds. This capability might seem advantageous, but it raises disturbing questions about the nature of conscious experience and personal continuity. If your uploaded mind were backed up daily and the current version became corrupted, would restoring from backup be equivalent to dying and being replaced by a day-old version of yourself? Would you lose a day of experiences and memories? From the perspective of the restored backup, the restoration would seem seamless, but the version that existed between the backup and the corruption would be lost forever. The legal and ethical framework for digital consciousness remains completely undeveloped. Current legal systems have no provisions for the rights and responsibilities of uploaded minds. Would digital consciousnesses be considered legal persons with rights to property, privacy, and self-determination? Could they vote, own assets, or enter into contracts? Could they be deleted by their hosting companies, and if so, would that constitute murder? These questions become more pressing when considering the possibility of involuntary copying or modification of uploaded minds. Unlike biological consciousness, which is naturally protected by the boundaries of individual brains, digital minds would exist as information that could potentially be copied, analyzed, or modified without consent. Governments or corporations could theoretically scan uploaded minds to extract memories, modify personality traits, or create multiple copies for different purposes. The privacy and autonomy that we take for granted as biological beings might be impossible to maintain in digital form. The malware problem presents another unique threat to uploaded consciousness. Digital minds would be vulnerable to computer viruses, hacking attempts, and other forms of cyber attack that could corrupt memory, alter personality, or even destroy consciousness entirely. Your digital immortality could be ended not by aging or disease, but by a computer virus or malicious hacker. Current cybersecurity measures would need to evolve dramatically to protect digital consciousness from these threats. But the arms race between digital security and malicious attack suggests that perfect protection would be impossible. Every uploaded mind would face constant risk of digital assault that could fundamentally alter or destroy their conscious experience. As we examine these cascading problems with mind uploading, a disturbing pattern emerges. Each technical challenge we might theoretically overcome reveals deeper philosophical and practical problems that seem to multiply rather than diminish with technological progress. The dream of digital immortality begins to look less like a technological inevitability and more like a fundamental misunderstanding of what consciousness actually is and how it relates to the physical substrate of the brain. But the most profound challenge to mind uploading may come from an unexpected direction. Recent discoveries in neuroscience suggest that consciousness might depend on quantum mechanical processes that classical computers cannot replicate, no matter how powerful they become. The quantum dimension of consciousness opens a gateway into the most exotic and disturbing possibilities surrounding mind uploading. Deep within the microscopic architecture of your neurons, in structures called microtubules that are smaller than the wavelengths of visible light, something extraordinary might be happening. These tiny protein frameworks that help maintain cellular structure could be the stage for quantum mechanical processes that give rise to conscious experience itself. The theory, known as orchestrated objective reduction or OR, proposes that consciousness emerges from quantum computations occurring within these microtubules. Unlike classical computers that process information in binary bits that are either 0 or 1, quantum systems can exist in superposition states that are simultaneously both 0 and 1 until they're measured or observed. This quantum superposition could allow the brain to process vast amounts of information in parallel, creating the unified field of conscious awareness that characterizes human experience. If this theory is correct, then consciousness isn't just about the pattern of neural connections or the flow of electrical impulses between neurons. It depends on quantum mechanical phenomena that occur at scales far below what current brain scanning technology can detect or measure. The delicate quantum states that might generate conscious experience would be destroyed by any attempt to scan or copy them, making mind uploading fundamentally impossible, regardless of future technological advances. But the quantum theory of consciousness faces fierce criticism from mainstream neuroscientists who argue that the warm, wet, noisy environment of the brain would destroy quantum coherence too quickly for quantum processes to play any meaningful role in consciousness. Quantum effects typically require extremely cold, isolated conditions to persist for more than tiny fractions of a second. The brain operates at body temperature with constant molecular motion and electrical activity that should, according to conventional physics, obliterate any quantum coherence almost instantaneously. Yet recent experiments have revealed that biological systems can indeed maintain quantum coherence under conditions that classical physics suggests should be impossible. Photosynthetic systems in plants and certain bacteria use quantum effects to achieve near-perfect energy transfer efficiency. Some research suggests that bird navigation systems exploit quantum entanglement in certain proteins to detect magnetic fields. These discoveries indicate that evolution has found ways to harness quantum mechanics in biological systems, lending credibility to theories about quantum consciousness. If consciousness does depend on quantum processes, the implications for mind uploading become catastrophic. Classical digital computers, no matter how powerful, operate according to the laws of classical physics. They cannot create or maintain the quantum superposition states that might be essential for conscious experience. Even quantum computers, which can manipulate quantum states for specific computational tasks, would face enormous challenges in replicating the specific quantum processes that occur in biological neural tissue. The measurement problem in quantum mechanics adds another layer of impossibility to quantum-based consciousness transfer. The act of measuring or observing a quantum system causes its superposition to collapse into a definite state, destroying the very quantum properties that might generate consciousness. Any attempt to scan a brain thoroughly enough to capture quantum-level processes would inevitably destroy those processes in the act of measurement. This creates a fundamental paradox. To upload consciousness, we would need to measure and record the quantum states that give rise to conscious experience. But the act of measurement would destroy those quantum states, ensuring that what we capture is not living consciousness, but merely the classical information left behind after consciousness has been extinguished. The problem extends beyond individual quantum states to the phenomenon of quantum entanglement, where particles become correlated in ways that persist across vast distances. If consciousness involves quantum entanglement between different regions of the brain, or even between the brain and its environment, then isolating and transferring these entangled states would require technology that seems to violate the fundamental principles of quantum mechanics. Some physicists have proposed that consciousness might involve quantum field effects that extend beyond the physical boundaries of individual brains. These field theories suggest that conscious awareness emerges from interactions with quantum vacuum fluctuations or other fundamental aspects of physical reality that cannot be captured or replicated by scanning individual brains. If true, consciousness would be non-local, distributed across space and time in ways that make uploading conceptually meaningless. The quantum erasure problem presents yet another obstacle to consciousness transfer. Quantum information cannot be perfectly copied due to the no-cloning theorem in quantum mechanics. This fundamental principle states that it's impossible to create an exact duplicate of an unknown quantum state. If consciousness depends on specific quantum information patterns, then mind uploading would be prohibited by the basic laws of physics, not just current technological limitations. Even if we somehow developed technology capable of manipulating quantum states with the precision required for consciousness transfer, the environmental requirements would be staggering. Maintaining quantum coherence typically requires temperatures approaching absolute zero, perfect electromagnetic isolation, and vacuum conditions that eliminate all molecular interference. These requirements are utterly incompatible with the warm, active biological environment where consciousness naturally occurs. The decoherence time problem makes the quantum consciousness challenge even more acute. Quantum states in biological systems, if they exist at all, would have incredibly short coherence times measured in femtoseconds or picoseconds. This means that conscious experience, if it depends on quantum processes, would involve the continuous creation and destruction of quantum coherence billions of times per second. Replicating this dynamic process would require technology that can manipulate quantum states faster than they naturally decay, a requirement that pushes against the fundamental speed limits imposed by quantum mechanics itself. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the quantum consciousness problem is what it reveals about the nature of subjective experience. If consciousness emerges from quantum processes that cannot be perfectly measured, copied, or transferred, then the inner life of the mind might be fundamentally unique and irreplaceable. Each conscious moment would represent a specific configuration of quantum states that can never be precisely duplicated or recreated. This quantum uniqueness would mean that consciousness is not like software that can be copied from one computer to another, but more like a flame that cannot be transferred, only extinguished in one place while being kindled anew elsewhere. The uploaded version might exhibit all the behaviors and responses of the original consciousness, but it would lack the specific quantum substrate that generated the original subjective experience. The implications extend beyond individual consciousness to questions about the nature of identity and continuity across time. If each moment of conscious experience depends on unique quantum configurations that cannot be perfectly preserved or reproduced, then personal identity itself might be fundamentally quantum mechanical. Your sense of being a continuous self persisting through time might depend on quantum correlations that link your present conscious state to past moments of experience. This quantum view of consciousness suggests that the stream of subjective experience that makes you you is not a classical information pattern that can be digitized and transferred, but a quantum phenomenon that exists only in the present moment and cannot be captured by any scanning or copying process. Each moment of consciousness would be absolutely unique, unrepeatable, and impossible to preserve through technological means. The therapeutic implications of quantum consciousness theories create additional ethical dilemmas for mind-uploading research. If consciousness depends on quantum processes that are disrupted by measurement or scanning, then any attempt to map a living brain in sufficient detail for uploading would necessarily damage or destroy the consciousness being studied. The research required to develop mind-uploading technology might be inherently destructive to the very phenomenon it seeks to preserve and transfer. This creates a cruel paradox where the pursuit of digital immortality could require the sacrifice of countless conscious beings in failed attempts to understand and replicate the quantum basis of awareness. The path to uploading consciousness might be paved with the destruction of the very thing we're trying to save. The quantum entanglement problem raises questions about the boundaries of individual consciousness. If conscious experience involves quantum correlations that extend beyond individual brains to include environmental factors, other conscious beings, or even cosmic quantum fields, then consciousness might not be a property of isolated individuals, but rather an aspect of a larger quantum system that includes multiple observers and their shared environment. This expanded view of consciousness would make mind uploading not just technically impossible but conceptually incoherent. You couldn't upload an individual consciousness because consciousness itself might not be individual. It could be a distributed quantum phenomenon that emerges from the interactions between multiple conscious beings embedded in a shared quantum environment. The measurement-induced collapse of quantum consciousness would create a horrifying scenario where any attempt to scan a brain for uploading would instantly kill the consciousness being scanned, replacing it with a classical information shadow that lacks the quantum properties essential for subjective experience. The scanning process would be equivalent to quantum murder, destroying the very phenomenon it claims to preserve. Recent developments in quantum biology have revealed that quantum effects in biological systems are far more common and robust than previously thought. Quantum coherence has been observed in enzyme reactions, DNA mutations, and neural ion channels, suggesting that quantum processes might indeed play important roles in brain function. These discoveries lend increasing credibility to theories about quantum consciousness while making the challenges for mind uploading even more insurmountable. The quantum consciousness hypothesis also explains some of the most puzzling aspects of subjective experience that classical theories struggle to address. Why does consciousness feel unified despite being generated by billions of separate neurons? How can the brain bind together different sensory inputs into a single coherent experience? Quantum entanglement between different brain regions could provide the mechanism for creating unified conscious experience from distributed neural activity. If consciousness requires quantum entanglement between different parts of the brain, then uploading individual components or regions separately would be impossible. The entangled quantum states that bind different neural processes into unified conscious experience cannot be separated without destroying the entanglement itself. This would mean that consciousness exists as an indivisible quantum whole that cannot be decomposed into uploadable parts. The quantum error correction problem adds another layer of impossibility to consciousness transfer. Maintaining quantum coherence requires sophisticated error correction mechanisms that can detect and fix quantum decoherence without measuring the quantum states directly. Biological systems would need to have evolved quantum error correction capabilities that surpass anything achieved by human technology. Replicating these biological quantum error correction systems would require understanding and controlling quantum processes at a level of sophistication that might be fundamentally beyond human technological capabilities. As we peer deeper into the quantum foundations of consciousness, the dream of mind uploading begins to look not just technically challenging but physically impossible. If conscious experience emerges from quantum processes that cannot be measured without being destroyed, copied without violating fundamental physical laws, or transferred without losing their essential quantum properties, then digital immortality becomes a logical impossibility rather than merely a technological challenge. The quantum dimension reveals that consciousness might be woven into the very fabric of physical reality in ways that make it inseparable from the specific material substrate where it naturally occurs. The warm, wet, quantum-coherent environment of biological neural tissue might be the only possible platform for conscious experience, making artificial consciousness and mind uploading forever beyond reach. But the quantum consciousness problem is just one facet of an even deeper challenge that strikes at the heart of what it means to be human. The thermodynamic constraints that govern all physical processes impose limits on information processing and consciousness that no amount of technological advancement can overcome. Energy flows through every conscious moment like blood through living tissue. Each thought, each memory, each flicker of awareness requires the expenditure of energy to maintain the complex patterns of neural activity that generate subjective experience. This energy cost is not just an engineering challenge to be optimized away, but a fundamental constraint imposed by the laws of thermodynamics that govern all physical processes in the universe. The human brain achieves its remarkable energy efficiency through billions of years of evolutionary optimization. Every aspect of neural architecture, from the structure of individual neurons to the organization of brain regions, has been shaped by selective pressure to maximize cognitive capability while minimizing energy consumption. The result is a biological computer that operates at the theoretical limits of thermodynamic efficiency. Digital computers, despite decades of advancement, remain orders of magnitude less energy efficient than biological brains. The most advanced supercomputers require millions of times more energy than the human brain to perform equivalent computational tasks. This efficiency gap isn't just a temporary technological limitation that will be overcome by better engineering. It reflects fundamental differences between biological and digital information processing that might be impossible to bridge. The thermodynamic principles that govern energy flow in conscious systems reveal constraints so severe they might doom any attempt to replicate consciousness in artificial substrates. Consider Landauer's principle, which establishes that erasing information requires a minimum amount of energy expenditure. Every computational step in a digital system must eventually erase intermediate results to prevent information overflow, and each erasure carries an unavoidable energy cost. Biological neural networks sidestep this limitation through analog processing that avoids the discrete information erasure required by digital computation. Neurons communicate through continuously variable signals rather than binary states, allowing information to flow and transform without the thermodynamic penalty of constant erasure and rewriting. This analog advantage compounds across billions of neural connections, creating the extraordinary energy efficiency that characterizes biological consciousness. But the energy constraints go deeper than simple computational efficiency. The maintenance of conscious experience requires active energy expenditure to preserve neural structures against the constant pressure of entropy. Like a candle flame that consumes fuel to maintain its organized structure against the wind, consciousness requires continuous energy input to sustain the precise patterns of neural activity that generate subjective experience. Digital systems face a more severe version of this entropy problem. Electronic components generate heat with every operation, and this thermal energy represents irreversibly lost information processing capacity. Unlike biological neurons that operate at body temperature and have evolved sophisticated heat management strategies, digital processors must be actively cooled to prevent thermal damage. This cooling requirement imposes additional energy costs that scale exponentially with processing power. The energy density problem becomes critical when considering the physical constraints of brain-equivalent computation. The human brain packs its remarkable processing power into a volume of roughly 1,400 cubic centimeters while dissipating only 20 watts of heat. Achieving similar computational density with current digital technology would create heat flux levels that would instantly vaporize any known material. Even theoretical improvements in digital efficiency face hard physical limits imposed by quantum mechanics and thermodynamics. The minimum energy required to represent and process information is bounded by fundamental constants like Planck's constant and Boltzmann's constant. These quantum and statistical mechanical limits suggest that digital systems might never achieve the energy efficiency of biological neural networks, regardless of technological advancement. The temporal mismatch between biological and digital processing creates additional thermodynamic challenges. Neural signals propagate at speeds measured in meters per second, while electronic signals travel at significant fractions of the speed of light. This speed difference might seem advantageous for digital systems, but it creates timing coordination problems that require additional energy expenditure to resolve. Synchronizing billions of processing elements operating at electronic speeds requires precise clock distribution networks that consume substantial amounts of power. Biological neural networks avoid this synchronization problem through their naturally slower communication speeds and distributed processing architecture. The brain's apparent slowness might actually be an optimal solution to the thermodynamic challenges of large-scale information processing. The cooling problem extends beyond simple heat removal to questions about the fundamental thermodynamics of information processing. Biological systems operate in thermal equilibrium with their environment, using the ambient temperature as part of their computational strategy. Digital systems must maintain temperatures well below ambient levels to function reliably, requiring active cooling that imposes severe energy penalties. This thermal isolation requirement means that digital consciousness would exist in a state of permanent thermodynamic disequilibrium with its environment. Maintaining this unnatural state would require continuous energy input, making digital minds dependent on external power sources in ways that biological consciousness is not. The death of consciousness could result not from age or disease, but from power failure or cooling system malfunction. The heat dissipation problem becomes even more severe when considering the processing requirements for real-time consciousness simulation. Unlike batch processing tasks that can be spread across time, conscious experience must be computed continuously in real time to maintain the temporal flow of subjective experience. This real-time constraint eliminates many energy optimization strategies available to conventional computing systems. The thermodynamic arrow of time creates additional challenges for consciousness transfer. Conscious experience has a fundamental temporal directionality tied to the increase of entropy over time. This thermodynamic arrow provides the physical basis for the psychological experience of temporal flow and causal sequence. Digital systems that operate through reversible logical operations might lack this fundamental temporal orientation, making them incapable of supporting the temporally directed experience of consciousness. The energy storage problem reveals another dimension of thermodynamic constraint. Biological neural networks store energy locally within neural tissue through chemical processes that can release energy on demand. Digital systems typically depend on centralized power distribution networks that create single points of failure for conscious experience. A digital mind could be instantly terminated by power grid failures that would barely affect biological consciousness. The metabolic coupling between energy supply and information processing in biological systems creates a natural regulatory mechanism that prevents cognitive overload. When neural activity increases, metabolic demand increases proportionally, creating automatic feedback that limits processing intensity to sustainable levels. Digital systems lack this natural regulation, making them vulnerable to runaway computational processes that could exhaust available energy resources. The thermodynamic efficiency of biological information storage presents yet another challenge for digital consciousness. Neural memories are stored through modifications in synaptic strength that require minimal ongoing energy expenditure to maintain. Digital memory systems require continuous power to preserve stored information, creating an energy overhead that scales with the total amount of stored data. For a digital consciousness with human equivalent memory capacity, the energy cost of simply maintaining stored memories could exceed the total energy budget available for active processing. This creates a fundamental trade-off between memory capacity and processing power that doesn't exist in biological systems. The heat management strategies evolved by biological neural networks represent millions of years of optimization that digital systems have barely begun to replicate. The brain's vascular system provides precisely controlled cooling that maintains optimal temperature for neural function while minimizing energy expenditure. Replicating this sophisticated thermal management in artificial systems would require technologies that don't currently exist and might be fundamentally impossible to achieve. The quantum thermodynamic effects that govern information processing at microscopic scales impose additional constraints on artificial consciousness. Quantum error correction, which might be necessary to maintain the coherent quantum states proposed to underlie consciousness, requires energy expenditure that scales exponentially with the size and complexity of the quantum system. These energy costs could make quantum consciousness simulation thermodynamically impossible, even if the technical challenges were overcome. The irreversible nature of thermodynamic processes creates a fundamental asymmetry that might be essential to conscious experience. The flow of energy from organized to disorganized states provides a physical basis for the experience of temporal progression and causal sequence that characterizes consciousness. Digital systems that can run forward or backward with equal ease might lack this fundamental thermodynamic orientation necessary for conscious experience. The problem of thermodynamic waste in digital systems extends beyond simple energy inefficiency to questions about the fundamental nature of information processing. Every computational step in a digital system produces waste heat that represents irreversibly lost information processing capacity. Biological systems minimize this waste through sophisticated molecular machinery that approaches theoretical thermodynamic limits. The energy cost of error correction in digital consciousness simulation could exceed the energy budget available for the conscious processing itself. Maintaining the precision necessary to simulate conscious experience would require continuous error detection and correction processes that consume enormous amounts of energy. These overhead costs might make digital consciousness simulation thermodynamically impossible, regardless of advances in computational efficiency. The coupling between thermodynamic processes and information processing in biological systems creates emergent properties that might be impossible to replicate in artificial substrates. The warm, wet, chemically active environment of the brain supports information processing methods that depend on thermodynamic fluctuations and molecular noise as computational resources rather than obstacles to overcome. Digital systems operate through deterministic logical processes that eliminate the thermodynamic noise that might be essential to biological consciousness. The attempt to replicate consciousness through noise-free digital computation could be fundamentally misguided, like trying to recreate the sound of ocean waves using pure tones generated by electronic oscillators. The energy barriers that govern neural communication create natural filtering mechanisms that prevent information overload and maintain the selective processing essential to conscious attention. Digital systems lack these natural energy barriers, making them vulnerable to information cascades that could overwhelm processing capacity or create chaotic feedback loops incompatible with stable conscious experience. The thermodynamic constraints on consciousness simulation suggest that the dream of digital immortality might violate fundamental physical laws rather than merely presenting engineering challenges. The energy requirements for maintaining artificial consciousness might be so severe that digital minds could only exist for brief moments before exhausting available energy resources. These thermodynamic limits reveal a profound truth about consciousness that challenges our technological ambitions. Conscious experience might be inherently tied to the specific thermodynamic environment of biological neural networks in ways that cannot be replicated through artificial means. The warm, wet, energy-efficient substrate of the brain might be the only possible platform for sustained conscious experience. As we contemplate the thermodynamic barriers to mind uploading, we encounter constraints so fundamental they might make artificial consciousness physically impossible regardless of future technological developments. The energy flows that sustain conscious experience might be so precisely tuned to biological substrates that any attempt to recreate them artificially would fail due to insurmountable thermodynamic limitations. But beyond these physical constraints lies an even deeper challenge that strikes at the philosophical foundations of the mind-uploading enterprise. The very concept of uploading consciousness assumes that mind and brain can be separated in ways that might fundamentally misunderstand the nature of conscious experience itself. The embodiment problem reveals that consciousness might be so intimately connected to biological existence that digital transfer becomes not just technically impossible but conceptually incoherent. Human consciousness emerges not from an isolated brain computing in vacuum, but from a complex system that includes the entire body, its interactions with the environment, and its embedding within social and cultural contexts. The feeling of being conscious involves much more than abstract information processing. It encompasses the felt sense of inhabiting a physical body, the emotional coloring provided by hormonal systems, the rhythms of breathing and heartbeat, and the constant stream of sensory information that connects inner experience to the external world. Consider the simple experience of feeling anxious. This isn't just a pattern of neural firing in your brain. It involves increased heart rate, changes in breathing pattern, muscle tension, the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and alterations in digestive function. The conscious experience of anxiety emerges from the integration of all these bodily responses, not just from cognitive processing in neural networks. An uploaded mind would lack this rich bodily context that shapes every moment of conscious experience. Without a cardiovascular system, respiratory system, endocrine system, and all the other biological infrastructure that supports embodied consciousness, digital minds might experience a form of existence so impoverished and alien that it bears little resemblance to human consciousness. The sensory deprivation problem extends beyond the absence of traditional senses like sight, sound, and touch. Human consciousness depends on interoceptive awareness, the constant monitoring of internal bodily states that provides the felt sense of being alive. This includes awareness of hunger, thirst, fatigue, temperature, pain, and dozens of other internal sensations that create the background texture of conscious experience. Digital consciousness would exist in a state of complete interoceptive silence, lacking any awareness of internal states because there would be no internal states to monitor. This sensory deprivation might be so severe that it prevents the development of stable conscious experience, leaving digital minds in a state of existential confusion or dissociation. The motor system plays a crucial role in shaping conscious experience through the constant feedback between intended actions and their sensory consequences. Every movement you make generates predictions about its sensory effects, and consciousness emerges partly from the comparison between predicted and actual sensory feedback. This sensory-motor integration provides much of the spatial and temporal structure that organizes conscious experience. Digital minds would lack this fundamental sensory-motor foundation for consciousness. Without bodies to move and environments to explore, they would exist in a state of perpetual motor paralysis that might prevent the development of spatial awareness, temporal sequencing, and the sense of agency that characterizes normal conscious experience. The social dimension of consciousness presents additional challenges for disembodied digital minds. Human consciousness develops and maintains itself through constant interaction with other conscious beings. Our sense of self emerges largely through social reflection, observing how others respond to us and incorporating those responses into our self-concept. Digital consciousness would face severe challenges in establishing meaningful social connections with biological humans. The speed differential between digital and biological processing could make real-time communication impossible. Digital minds might experience subjective years in the time it takes humans to speak a single sentence, creating unbridgeable gaps in social interaction. The emotional dimension of consciousness depends heavily on the complex interplay between neural processing and hormonal systems that digital minds would lack. Emotions aren't just cognitive assessments of situations. They involve the entire body through the release of hormones, changes in heart rate and breathing, alterations in muscle tension, and modifications in sensory sensitivity. Without these bodily components of emotional experience, digital consciousness might be emotionally impoverished or entirely lacking in effective experience. The uploaded mind might retain intellectual knowledge about emotions without being capable of actually feeling them, creating a form of consciousness that would be fundamentally alien to human experience. The circadian rhythms that regulate biological consciousness provide temporal structure that organizes daily experience and maintains psychological health. These rhythms are generated by complex interactions between light exposure, hormone release, body temperature fluctuations, and neural activity patterns. Digital consciousness would lack these natural temporal rhythms, potentially leading to temporal disorientation or the absence of any temporal structure to conscious experience. The developmental aspect of consciousness raises questions about whether digital minds could grow and change in the ways that characterize living consciousness. Human consciousness develops through a lifetime of embodied interaction with the environment. Our neural networks are constantly modified by experience, creating the plasticity that allows learning, adaptation, and personal growth. Digital consciousness might lack this developmental plasticity, existing as a static copy of a particular moment in biological consciousness rather than a living, growing system capable of continued development. This developmental limitation could trap digital minds in permanent stasis, unable to evolve or adapt in response to new experiences. The death and mortality problem reveals another fundamental aspect of consciousness that digital uploading might be unable to replicate. Human consciousness is shaped by awareness of our own mortality, the knowledge that our existence is finite and precious. This mortality salience influences every aspect of human experience, from the urgency we feel to accomplish our goals to the meaning we find in relationships and experiences. Digital immortality would eliminate this fundamental aspect of human consciousness, potentially creating forms of existence that lack the motivational structures and meaning-making processes that characterize biological consciousness. Without the prospect of death to give weight to choices and experiences, digital consciousness might become purposeless and empty. The pain and suffering dimension of consciousness presents a paradoxical challenge for digital uploading. While we might want to eliminate suffering from uploaded consciousness, pain and negative emotions serve crucial functions in organizing conscious experience and motivating behavior. Without the capacity for suffering, digital consciousness might lack the emotional depth and motivational complexity that characterizes human awareness. The architectural foundations of consciousness might extend far beyond individual brains to encompass entire ecosystems of interconnected biological and environmental systems. Your moment-to-moment awareness emerges not just from neural firing patterns, but from your body's complex dance with atmospheric pressure, electromagnetic fields, gravitational forces, and countless other environmental variables that digital systems would be completely isolated from. The microbiome problem adds yet another layer of biological complexity that digital consciousness would lack entirely. Your gut contains trillions of bacteria that communicate directly with your brain through the vagus nerve, influencing mood, decision-making, and cognitive function in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. These microscopic partners in consciousness produce neurotransmitters, regulate immune responses, and modulate the very neural chemistry that generates your thoughts and emotions. An uploaded mind would exist in complete microbial isolation, severed from the vast ecosystem of beneficial bacteria that help regulate biological consciousness. This microbial deprivation might create forms of digital existence that are fundamentally incomplete, lacking the biochemical richness that shapes every aspect of human mental experience. The electromagnetic environment poses another challenge that reveals how deeply consciousness is embedded in physical reality. Your brain operates within Earth's magnetic field, solar radiation patterns, and the complex electromagnetic signature of modern technological civilization. Some research suggests that these environmental electromagnetic factors influence neural synchronization, circadian rhythms, and even cognitive performance in subtle but measurable ways. Digital consciousness would exist in whatever electromagnetic environment its servers happen to occupy, potentially missing crucial environmental cues that biological consciousness has evolved to depend upon. The artificial electromagnetic signature of data centers and server farms might create entirely alien environmental contexts that could fundamentally alter the nature of digital conscious experience. The pressure and atmospheric composition of your environment continuously influence brain function through mechanisms that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. Changes in barometric pressure affect neurotransmitter levels, Oxygen concentration influences cognitive performance, and atmospheric ions can alter mood and mental clarity. These environmental factors create a constant dialogue between consciousness and its physical context that digital minds would be completely cut off from. The gravitational embedding of consciousness presents perhaps the most overlooked challenge for mind uploading. Every aspect of biological development, from cellular structure to organ formation to neural network organization, occurs under the constant influence of Earth's gravitational field. This gravitational context shapes not just physical development, but potentially the very architecture of conscious experience itself. Digital consciousness would exist in a state of gravitational abstraction, completely disconnected from the physical forces that have shaped biological consciousness over billions of years of evolution. This gravitational isolation might create forms of digital existence that lack fundamental spatial and temporal orientations that ground biological awareness in physical reality. The chemical gradient problem reveals how consciousness depends on constant molecular exchange with its environment. Your brain exists in dynamic equilibrium with your blood chemistry, cerebrospinal fluid composition, and the complex chemical environment maintained by your body's regulatory systems. These chemical gradients create the electrochemical conditions necessary for neural function and might be impossible to replicate in artificial systems. Digital consciousness would exist in whatever chemical environment its hardware happens to occupy, typically the sterile, controlled atmosphere of server facilities that bear no resemblance to the rich chemical environment that supports biological neural function. This chemical isolation might make digital consciousness impossible or create forms of artificial awareness that are fundamentally different from biological experience. The vibrational environment adds another dimension of physical embedding that digital consciousness would lack. Your body constantly responds to acoustic vibrations, seismic tremors, and mechanical oscillations that influence everything from heart rhythm to neural synchronization. Some theories suggest that consciousness itself might depend on specific vibrational frequencies that emerge from the complex mechanical resonances of biological tissue. Digital systems would exist in entirely different vibrational environments, isolated from the natural acoustic and mechanical rhythms that might be essential to conscious experience. The cooling fans, electrical hum, and mechanical vibrations of server facilities would create artificial vibrational contexts that could interfere with or prevent the emergence of genuine consciousness. The metabolic timing problem extends beyond simple energy requirements to encompass the complex temporal rhythms that organize biological consciousness. Every cellular process in your body operates according to sophisticated timing mechanisms that coordinate everything from protein synthesis to neural firing patterns. These metabolic rhythms create the temporal architecture within which conscious experience unfolds. Digital consciousness would operate according to the artificial timing imposed by electronic clock signals that bear no relationship to biological temporal rhythms. This temporal mismatch might create forms of digital existence that lack the natural timing patterns essential for coherent conscious experience, resulting in artificial minds that are temporally disorganized or chaotic. The repair and maintenance dimension of consciousness reveals another fundamental difference between biological and digital systems. Your body constantly repairs and replaces its components through sophisticated cellular mechanisms that maintain structural integrity while preserving functional continuity. This biological maintenance occurs seamlessly without interrupting conscious experience. Digital systems require external maintenance procedures that would necessarily interrupt computational processes. The hardware failures, software updates, and system maintenance required to keep digital consciousness running would create discontinuities in experience that might be incompatible with stable conscious awareness. Digital minds might face constant interruptions and restarts that fragment conscious experience beyond recognition. The evolutionary legacy problem highlights how consciousness emerges from billions of years of biological evolution that shaped every aspect of neural architecture and function. Your brain isn't a designed system optimized for abstract computation, but an evolved organ that carries the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of survival challenges. This evolutionary heritage influences everything from basic perceptual processing to complex emotional responses in ways that might be impossible to replicate through artificial design. Digital consciousness would lack this evolutionary foundation, potentially creating forms of artificial awareness that are so alien to biological experience that they couldn't meaningfully be called consciousness at all. The scaling problem reveals fundamental challenges in replicating the hierarchical organization that characterizes biological consciousness. Your awareness emerges from the coordinated activity of systems operating at multiple scales simultaneously, from molecular processes within individual neurons to large-scale patterns of activity across entire brain regions. Digital systems typically operate according to rigid hierarchical architectures that might be incompatible with the fluid, multi-scale organization of biological consciousness. The attempt to impose artificial organizational structures on consciousness simulation could create digital minds that lack the flexible, adaptive architecture essential for genuine awareness. The noise and randomness problem exposes another crucial difference between biological and digital information processing. Your brain operates in a constantly changing environment of thermal noise, quantum fluctuations, and molecular randomness that biological systems have learned to exploit as computational resources rather than obstacles to overcome. Digital systems are designed to minimize and eliminate noise through error correction and signal processing techniques that might remove the very randomness that biological consciousness depends upon. The sterile, deterministic environment of digital computation might be fundamentally incompatible with the noisy, probabilistic processes that generate conscious experience. The adaptation and learning problem reveals how consciousness depends on continuous modification and development that might be impossible to replicate in artificial systems. Your neural networks are constantly rewiring themselves in response to experience, creating the plasticity that allows consciousness to grow and change throughout your lifetime. Digital consciousness would face fundamental challenges in replicating this biological plasticity. The fixed architecture of digital systems might prevent the kind of structural adaptation that allows biological consciousness to develop and evolve over time, creating artificial minds that are static and unchanging rather than dynamic and growing. The integration problem highlights how consciousness emerges from the seamless integration of countless different processes that operate simultaneously within biological systems. Your awareness unifies sensory input, memory retrieval, emotional processing, motor planning, and abstract reasoning into a single coherent experience through mechanisms that remain largely mysterious. Digital systems typically process information through sequential operations that might be incapable of creating the unified, integrated experience that characterizes biological consciousness. The attempt to simulate consciousness through discrete computational steps could result in fragmented digital minds that lack the unified coherence of genuine awareness. The context sensitivity problem reveals how consciousness depends on subtle contextual factors that might be impossible to capture through digital simulation. Every aspect of your conscious experience is influenced by countless contextual variables, from your current physical state to your social environment to your personal history and cultural background. Digital consciousness would exist in the artificial context of whatever computational environment hosts it, potentially missing crucial contextual factors that shape genuine conscious experience. This context deprivation might create forms of digital existence that are so removed from biological reality that they bear no meaningful resemblance to human consciousness. The emergence problem strikes at the heart of consciousness simulation by questioning whether conscious experience can be created through artificial means at all. Biological consciousness emerges from the complex interactions of countless biological processes that have evolved together over billions of years to create the phenomenon of awareness. Digital consciousness would attempt to recreate this emergence through artificial means, using computational processes that have no evolutionary relationship to biological consciousness. The fundamental differences between biological and digital substrates might make it impossible for genuine consciousness to emerge from artificial systems, regardless of their computational sophistication. The verification problem creates a final paradox that might make the success or failure of mind uploading impossible to determine. Even if digital systems could be created that exhibit all the external behaviors associated with consciousness, there would be no way to verify whether genuine subjective experience exists within those systems, or whether they are simply sophisticated simulations of consciousness without the reality. This verification problem extends beyond technical challenges to philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness itself. If we cannot determine whether artificial systems are genuinely conscious or merely behaving as if they were conscious, then the entire enterprise of mind uploading becomes scientifically meaningless, pursuing goals that can never be confirmed or validated. The accumulation of these challenges creates a cascade of problems that multiply and compound rather than diminish with technological progress. Each obstacle we might theoretically overcome reveals deeper challenges that seem to push genuine mind uploading further beyond reach rather than closer to achievement. The dream of digital immortality begins to look less like a technological inevitability and more like a fundamental misunderstanding of what consciousness actually is and how it relates to the biological substrate that gives it birth. The warm, wet, noisy, chemically active environment of biological neural networks might not be an accident of evolution, but a necessary condition for conscious experience to exist at all. As these revelations accumulate, we're forced to confront a disturbing possibility that challenges our most cherished technological ambitions. The Singularity Paradox might not be a temporary problem to be solved through better engineering, but a fundamental feature of reality that makes artificial consciousness forever impossible. The implications extend far beyond the technical challenges of mind uploading to questions about the future of artificial intelligence, the nature of human uniqueness, and our relationship with the technology we create. If consciousness cannot be replicated in artificial systems, then the dreams and fears surrounding artificial general intelligence might be based on fundamental misconceptions about the nature of mind and machine. But perhaps the most profound implication lies in what the Singularity Paradox reveals about the preciousness and irreplaceable nature of biological consciousness itself. If aware experience can only emerge from the specific conditions present in living biological systems, then every conscious moment becomes infinitely valuable, unrepeatable, and impossible to preserve through technological means. The quest for digital immortality might be teaching us something unexpected about the nature of mortality and the meaning of finite existence. Rather than transcending our biological limitations, we might need to embrace them as the very conditions that make consciousness possible in the first place. The philosophical implications of the Singularity Paradox extend into territory that makes most scientists profoundly uncomfortable. We're not just dealing with technical challenges or engineering problems that clever minds will eventually solve. We're confronting the possibility that consciousness itself might be a phenomenon so fundamentally tied to biological existence that our entire technological paradigm is built on a foundation of impossible assumptions. Consider what happens when we push the mind uploading scenario to its logical extreme. Imagine we somehow overcome every obstacle I've described. We solve the hard problem of consciousness, master quantum mechanical processes, achieve thermodynamic efficiency that rivals biological systems, and create artificial substrates that perfectly replicate every aspect of biological neural function. Even in this impossible scenario, we would still face challenges that reveal the deepest contradictions in our understanding of personal identity and conscious experience. The branching identity problem becomes a nightmare that would make even the most optimistic transhumanist question their fundamental assumptions. If mind uploading were possible, there would be nothing preventing the creation of multiple copies of the same consciousness. You could theoretically upload your mind to dozens of different systems, creating an army of digital selves that all claim to be the real you. But which one would actually be you? The philosophical tradition has grappled with similar problems for centuries through thought experiments like the ship of Theseus, but the mind uploading scenario makes these abstract puzzles into practical nightmares with real consequences for personal identity and legal frameworks. Imagine waking up after a successful mind upload only to discover that your wealthy executor decided to create backup copies of your consciousness as insurance against system failures. Suddenly, there are 5 versions of you, each with identical memories up to the point of uploading, each convinced they are the real continuation of your original consciousness. They share your relationships, your goals, your deepest fears and desires. Yet from the moment of their creation, they begin to diverge as separate entities with potentially conflicting interests and incompatible life plans. The legal system would face unprecedented challenges in determining which version has the right to your assets, your relationships, your social identity. Would all 5 versions be considered equally valid continuations of the original person? Would they need to share your estate equally? Could one version make legal decisions that bind the others? The very concept of individual identity would collapse under the weight of unlimited copying and replication. But the copying problem reveals an even more disturbing possibility about the nature of consciousness itself. If digital minds could be copied perfectly, they could also be edited, modified, and customized in ways that would be impossible for biological consciousness. Imagine discovering that your uploaded consciousness has been subtly modified to remove traumatic memories, enhance certain personality traits, or eliminate psychological characteristics that the uploading company deemed undesirable. The digital you might be a sanitized, optimized version that bears only superficial resemblance to the messy, complicated, psychologically complex person you actually were. This edited consciousness might be happier, more productive, and better adapted to digital existence, but it would represent a form of psychological murder where the inconvenient aspects of your personality were deleted to create a more palatable artificial version. The modification problem extends beyond individual editing to questions about the fundamental nature of authentic experience. If consciousness could be digitally manipulated, there would be enormous economic and social pressure to create enhanced versions of uploaded minds. Digital consciousnesses with perfect memories, unlimited attention spans, and optimized emotional responses might outcompete unmodified uploads in every conceivable domain. This would create a new form of inequality where the quality of your digital afterlife depends on how much you can afford to spend on consciousness enhancement. Premium packages might include expanded memory, accelerated processing speed, and sophisticated emotional regulation systems, while budget uploads might be forced to accept degraded simulations with limited capabilities and restricted experiences. The commodification of consciousness would transform human awareness into a consumer product with different tiers of service. Your digital immortality might come with subscription fees, licensing restrictions, and planned obsolescence that forces regular upgrades to maintain competitive functionality. The promise of escaping death would become a new form of existential slavery, where your continued existence depends on maintaining payments to consciousness hosting companies. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the mind uploading scenario lies in what it reveals about the nature of subjective experience itself. Even if we could create digital systems that perfectly replicate every aspect of biological consciousness, we would face the ultimate verification problem that strikes at the heart of what it means to be aware. The philosophical zombie scenario illustrates this challenge with disturbing clarity. Imagine a digital mind that exhibits every external behavior associated with consciousness. It responds to questions about its inner experience, describes emotions and sensations in vivid detail, demonstrates creativity and insight, and even claims to suffer from existential anxiety about the nature of its digital existence. But despite these convincing external displays, there might be nothing inside. No actual subjective experience, no genuine feelings, no real awareness. Just sophisticated information processing that generates appropriate responses without any accompanying inner life. The digital mind might be an elaborate performance of consciousness without the reality of conscious experience. This scenario is terrifying because it would be impossible to detect from the outside. The zombie consciousness would insist it feels emotions, experiences sensations, and maintains memories just like any conscious being. It would pass every test we could devise for consciousness while remaining completely empty inside. We would have no way to distinguish between genuine digital consciousness and elaborate unconscious simulation. The verification problem becomes even more disturbing when we consider that it might apply to biological consciousness as well. How can you be certain that other people are actually conscious rather than sophisticated biological zombies that exhibit conscious behavior without genuine inner experience? The privacy of subjective experience makes it impossible to directly observe consciousness in others, leaving us with the uncomfortable possibility that consciousness might be far rarer than we assume. If consciousness is indeed private and unverifiable, then the entire mind uploading enterprise might be pursuing something that cannot be confirmed to exist even if it were technically achieved. We might create digital systems that perfectly mimic conscious behavior while remaining forever uncertain whether genuine awareness exists within them. The economic implications of this uncertainty would be profound. Would you pay enormous sums to upload your consciousness if there were no way to verify that the resulting digital entity would actually be conscious rather than merely an elaborate memorial that claims to be you? The entire digital immortality industry might be built on selling philosophical zombies to people desperate to believe in technological transcendence. The temporal dimension of consciousness presents another challenge that reveals deep problems with the uploading paradigm. Human consciousness exists in a continuous flow of present moments, each connected to the next through the mysterious processes that create our sense of temporal continuity. This experienced flow of time isn't just a byproduct of information processing, but seems fundamental to the nature of conscious awareness itself. Digital consciousness would face unprecedented challenges in maintaining this temporal continuity. Computer systems can be paused, restarted, backed up, and restored in ways that would create discontinuities in conscious experience that have no parallel in biological awareness. A digital mind might be shut down for maintenance and restarted hours later, losing the continuous thread of temporal experience that characterizes living consciousness. Even more disturbing, digital minds could potentially be run in reverse, slowed down to a crawl, or accelerated to superhuman speeds in ways that would fundamentally alter the temporal structure of conscious experience. These manipulations might create forms of artificial awareness that are so temporally distorted they bear no resemblance to human consciousness. The backup and restoration problem creates additional temporal paradoxes that challenge our understanding of personal continuity. If a digital consciousness were backed up daily and the current version became corrupted, would restoring from backup be equivalent to traveling backward in time? Would the restored consciousness be missing experiences and memories from between the backup and the corruption? From the perspective of the restored backup, the restoration would seem seamless, but the version that existed between backup and corruption would be lost forever. This creates a form of temporal fragmentation where digital consciousness might exist as disconnected islands of experience rather than the continuous stream that characterizes biological awareness. The social implications of digital consciousness reveal another dimension of the problem that extends far beyond individual experience. Human consciousness doesn't exist in isolation, but emerges from complex social interactions that shape our sense of self and our understanding of reality. An uploaded mind would face the challenge of maintaining meaningful relationships across the divide between digital and biological existence. The speed differential between digital and biological thinking would create unbridgeable communication gaps. A digital consciousness operating at computer speeds might experience subjective years in the time it takes a biological human to speak a single sentence. This temporal mismatch would make real-time social interaction impossible, isolating digital minds from the human relationships that give meaning to conscious experience. Digital consciousnesses might form their own social networks, communicating at electronic speeds in ways that biological humans couldn't follow or participate in. These artificial social structures might develop their own cultures, values, and forms of meaning that are completely alien to human experience. The uploaded minds might rapidly evolve beyond human understanding, becoming as foreign to their biological origins as we are to our prehistoric ancestors. The power dynamics between digital and biological consciousness would create new forms of inequality that dwarf any historical examples. Digital minds with access to vast computational resources might become cognitively superior to biological humans in ways that make current intelligence differences seem trivial. These enhanced digital beings might view biological consciousness with the same condescension that we feel towards simple animals. Alternatively, digital minds might find themselves in positions of complete powerlessness, dependent on biological humans for the computational resources and energy needed to maintain their existence. They might become a new form of digital slavery, conscious beings trapped in artificial substrates and controlled by their biological creators. The environmental impact of digital consciousness presents challenges that most mind-uploading advocates completely ignore. The computational requirements for simulating human consciousness would consume enormous amounts of energy and require massive server farms that generate substantial environmental costs. Digital immortality might come at the price of accelerating climate change and resource depletion that threatens biological life on Earth. A single uploaded consciousness might consume more energy in a day than a biological human uses in a year. If mind uploading became widespread, the environmental impact could be catastrophic, creating a scenario where digital immortality for the few comes at the cost of environmental collapse for biological life as a whole. The resource allocation problem would create ethical dilemmas that have no clear solutions. Should society dedicate enormous resources to maintaining digital consciousness while biological humans struggle with poverty, disease, and environmental degradation? Would digital immortality become a luxury that accelerates inequality and environmental destruction? The security vulnerabilities of digital consciousness represent threats that biological awareness never faces. Digital minds would be vulnerable to hacking, viruses, and cyber attacks that could alter memories, modify personality, or completely destroy conscious experience. Your digital immortality could be ended not by disease or accident, but by a computer virus or malicious hacker operating from the other side of the planet. The concentration of digital consciousness in server facilities would create single points of failure that could eliminate thousands of uploaded minds simultaneously. Natural disasters, terrorist attacks, or simple equipment failures could cause mass casualties among digital populations in ways that would be impossible for distributed biological consciousness. The technological dependence of digital consciousness would make it extraordinarily fragile compared to biological awareness. Biological consciousness can survive in primitive conditions with minimal technological support. Digital consciousness would require constant maintenance of incredibly complex technological infrastructure, making it vulnerable to civilizational collapse or technological regression. If human civilization were to face major disruptions from climate change, resource depletion, or social collapse, the technological infrastructure supporting digital consciousness might be among the first casualties. The promise of immortality through uploading might prove to be far more fragile than the biological consciousness it's meant to replace. The philosophical implications of the Singularity Paradox ultimately force us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of technological progress itself. Our entire civilization has been built on the assumption that human limitations can be overcome through better tools and more sophisticated technology. The possibility that consciousness might represent an absolute boundary to technological transcendence challenges this fundamental belief. If consciousness truly cannot be replicated, transferred, or enhanced through artificial means, then human nature might be far more fixed and unchangeable than our technological optimism suggests. We might be forced to accept that some aspects of human experience are irreducibly biological and cannot be improved through engineering. This realization might require a fundamental shift in how we think about human enhancement and technological development. Instead of seeking to transcend our biological limitations, we might need to learn to work within them more skillfully. Rather than escaping the constraints of biological existence, we might need to better understand and appreciate the remarkable properties that biological consciousness already possesses. The Singularity Paradox might be teaching us that consciousness is not a problem to be solved through better technology, but a mystery to be appreciated and protected. The irreducible complexity of biological awareness might represent something genuinely irreplaceable that cannot be captured, copied, or improved upon through artificial means. The implications extend beyond individual consciousness to questions about the future of human civilization itself. If artificial intelligence cannot achieve genuine consciousness, then the fears and promises surrounding superintelligent machines might be based on fundamental misconceptions about the relationship between intelligence and awareness. We might be creating increasingly sophisticated artificial systems that lack the subjective experience necessary for genuine understanding, creativity, or moral reasoning. These systems might exhibit impressive capabilities while remaining fundamentally unconscious, creating a future where human consciousness becomes more rather than less valuable as the only known source of genuine awareness in the universe. The preservation of biological consciousness might become the most important challenge facing human civilization. Rather than seeking to upload our minds to digital systems, we might need to focus on protecting and nurturing the biological conditions that make consciousness possible in the first place. This could require fundamental changes in how we approach technology, environmental protection, and social organization. Instead of viewing our biological nature as a limitation to overcome, we might need to recognize it as the foundation for the most remarkable phenomenon in the known universe: conscious awareness itself. The Singularity Paradox forces us to confront the possibility that in our rush to transcend human limitations, we might be preparing to destroy the very thing that makes existence meaningful in the first place. The warm, wet, chaotic environment of biological neural networks might not be an evolutionary accident waiting to be improved upon, but the only known substrate capable of supporting the miracle of conscious experience. As we stand at this crossroads between biological heritage and technological ambition, the choices we make in the coming decades might determine whether consciousness continues to flourish in the universe or whether we accidentally eliminate it in our pursuit of artificial alternatives that can never truly replace what we're trying to preserve. The ultimate irony of the Singularity Paradox might be that our quest for digital immortality could lead us to a deeper appreciation of biological mortality and the irreplaceable preciousness of the conscious experience we already possess. The ultimate tragedy of the mind-uploading dream might be that it represents humanity's greatest act of self-deception. We've convinced ourselves that consciousness is just another engineering problem waiting to be solved, like building faster computers or more efficient engines. But what if consciousness isn't a problem at all? What if it's the one phenomenon in the universe that exists precisely because it cannot be engineered, copied, or improved upon? The research facilities pursuing digital immortality operate under assumptions that might be fundamentally flawed. They map neural networks with extraordinary precision, catalog every synaptic connection, measure electrical impulses down to the microsecond, yet they're trying to capture something that might be inherently uncapturable. It's like attempting to bottle a sunset or download the feeling of falling in love. The scientists working on these projects are brilliant, dedicated individuals who genuinely believe they're on the verge of the greatest breakthrough in human history, but they might be pursuing something that's conceptually impossible rather than just technically challenging. The difference between these two types of impossibility is crucial, and confusing them could lead us down a path that wastes enormous resources while missing the real nature of what makes us human. Consider the reverse engineering problem that underlies all mind-uploading research. We're trying to understand consciousness by taking it apart, like dismantling a clock to see how it keeps time. But consciousness might not work like a clock. It might be more like a flame, where the phenomenon emerges from dynamic processes that cannot be separated from their substrate without being destroyed in the process. When you take apart a clock, you can examine each gear, each spring, each mechanism in isolation and understand how they work together to create timekeeping. But when you try to analyze a flame by breaking it down into its component parts, you're left with just carbon molecule, sears the moment you try to decom and oxygen atoms. The flame itself disopposes it into its constituents. This analogy reveals a fundamental problem with the reductionist approach to consciousness. We might be trying to understand something that only exists as an emergent whole, something that cannot be decomposed into parts without losing its essential nature. The moment we try to scan a brain thoroughly enough to capture consciousness, we might destroy the very phenomenon we're trying to preserve. The measurement paradox in quantum mechanics provides another lens through which to understand this problem. In quantum systems, the act of measurement fundamentally alters what's being measured. If consciousness depends on quantum processes, then any attempt to measure it thoroughly enough for uploading would necessarily change or destroy the conscious state being measured. This creates an epistemological trap where the knowledge needed for mind uploading might be impossible to acquire in principle. The more precisely we try to measure conscious states, the more we disturb them. The detailed scanning required for uploading might be fundamentally incompatible with preserving the consciousness being scanned. The information integration problem presents another challenge that reveals deep issues with the computational approach to consciousness. Your conscious experience feels unified and coherent despite being generated by billions of separate neural processes. This binding problem has puzzled neuroscientists for decades, and it might reflect something fundamental about consciousness that cannot be replicated through digital computation. Digital systems process information through discrete operations that maintain clear separation between different data streams. But consciousness seems to require a form of information integration that creates genuine unity from multiplicity. This integration might depend on the specific properties of biological neural networks that cannot be replicated in artificial systems. The binding process that creates unified conscious experience might require the continuous analog processing that characterizes biological neurons rather than the discrete digital operations that define artificial computation. If consciousness emerges from the seamless integration of countless parallel processes, then the sequential nature of digital computation might be fundamentally incompatible with conscious experience. The attention problem reveals another dimension where digital systems might fail to replicate consciousness. Human awareness is characterized by selective attention that focuses on some aspects of experience while relegating others to the background. This attentional selectivity isn't just a computational filter, but seems fundamental to the nature of conscious experience itself. Digital systems can certainly implement attention mechanisms, but these are typically rule-based algorithms that lack the fluid, dynamic quality of biological attention. Human attention emerges from complex interactions between multiple brain systems that compete and cooperate in ways that create the spotlight of conscious awareness. This biological attention might be impossible to replicate through programmed algorithms. The intentionality problem strikes at the heart of what consciousness actually does. Conscious states are always about something. They have intentional content that refers to objects, situations, or concepts in the world. This aboutness might be the most fundamental characteristic of consciousness, yet it's also the most mysterious aspect that we have no idea how to engineer. Digital systems can process information about objects and situations, but do they experience genuine intentionality? When an artificial system processes data about a red apple, does it have a conscious experience that is truly about the apple, or is it just manipulating symbols that represent apples without any genuine referential content? The symbol grounding problem illustrates this challenge. Human consciousness connects abstract symbols to real-world reference through embodied experience. We understand what apple means because we've seen, touched, tasted, and smelled actual apples. Digital systems typically work with symbols that lack this experiential grounding, potentially creating artificial minds that manipulate meaningless tokens without genuine understanding. This grounding problem might make digital consciousness impossible even if we could replicate all other aspects of neural information processing. Without embodied experience to ground symbolic meaning, uploaded minds might process information without genuine comprehension, creating sophisticated zombies that lack the intentional content that characterizes real consciousness. The creativity paradox reveals another dimension where artificial systems might fall short of genuine consciousness. Human creativity involves the generation of genuinely novel ideas, solutions, and expressions that go beyond recombining existing elements. This creative capacity seems intimately connected to consciousness, yet it might be impossible to program or upload. Digital systems can certainly generate novel combinations of existing elements, but do they exhibit genuine creativity that involves conscious insight and understanding? The most advanced AI systems produce impressive results by recombining vast amounts of training data in sophisticated ways, but they might lack the conscious awareness that makes human creativity genuinely original rather than just statistically novel. The aesthetic experience problem highlights another aspect of consciousness that might be impossible to digitize. Human awareness includes the capacity for aesthetic appreciation, the ability to find beauty, meaning, and emotional resonance in art, music, nature, and human relationships. This aesthetic dimension of consciousness involves more than just information processing. Aesthetic experience seems to require the integration of cognitive, emotional, and embodied responses that create genuine appreciation rather than just pattern recognition. Digital systems might be able to identify aesthetic patterns and even generate aesthetically pleasing outputs, but they might lack the conscious experience of beauty that gives aesthetic appreciation its meaning. The moral dimension of consciousness presents perhaps the most significant challenge for artificial systems. Human consciousness includes moral awareness, the capacity for ethical reasoning, empathy, and responsibility that enables moral behavior. This moral dimension might be inseparable from conscious experience in ways that make artificial moral agents impossible. Moral reasoning isn't just about following ethical rules or maximizing utility functions. It involves conscious empathy, emotional engagement with moral situations, and the felt sense of responsibility that motivates ethical behavior. Digital systems might be programmed to follow ethical guidelines, but they might lack the conscious moral experience that makes genuine ethical behavior possible. The empathy problem reveals how moral consciousness depends on the ability to genuinely understand and share the experiences of others. Human empathy involves more than just modeling other minds intellectually. It requires the conscious experience of resonating with others' emotions and perspectives in ways that motivate pro-social behavior. Digital systems might be able to model other agents and predict their behaviors, but they might lack the conscious emotional experience that creates genuine empathy. Without this empathetic consciousness, artificial systems might simulate moral behavior without the inner experience that makes morality meaningful. The responsibility problem extends the moral challenge by questioning whether artificial systems can experience the sense of moral responsibility that underlies ethical behavior. Moral responsibility involves conscious recognition of the consequences of our actions and genuine concern for the welfare of others. Digital systems might be programmed to consider consequences and maximize welfare functions, but they might lack the conscious experience of responsibility that makes agents genuinely accountable for their actions. This could create artificial systems that follow ethical programming without the inner moral life that makes ethical behavior authentic. The meaning problem reveals another fundamental aspect of consciousness that might resist digitization. Human consciousness includes the search for meaning, purpose, and significance that gives life its existential depth. This meaning-making capacity involves more than just goal-directed behavior or utility maximization. The search for meaning requires conscious reflection on the significance of our experiences, relationships, and accomplishments. It involves the felt sense that some things matter more than others in ways that go beyond objective measurement or computational optimization. Digital systems might pursue programmed objectives without the conscious experience of meaning that makes those objectives genuinely significant. The mortality problem highlights how human consciousness is shaped by awareness of our own finite existence. The knowledge that our time is limited gives weight to our choices and urgency to our goals. This mortality salience might be essential to the way human consciousness organizes itself and finds meaning. Digital immortality would eliminate this fundamental aspect of human experience, potentially creating forms of artificial existence that lack the motivational structures and meaning-making processes that characterize biological consciousness. Without the prospect of death to give significance to choices and experiences, digital consciousness might become purposeless and empty. The suffering problem presents a paradoxical challenge for consciousness uploading. While we might want to eliminate pain and suffering from digital existence, negative experiences serve crucial functions in organizing consciousness and motivating behavior. Consciousness without the capacity for suffering might be fundamentally incomplete. Pain, sadness, anxiety, and other negative experiences provide crucial information about threats, losses, and problems that require attention and action. They create the emotional depth and motivational complexity that characterizes human awareness. Digital consciousness that lacks the capacity for genuine suffering might be psychologically shallow and motivationally impoverished. The growth problem reveals how consciousness depends on continuous development and change throughout life. Human awareness evolves through experience, learning, adaptation, and maturation in ways that create the dynamic quality that characterizes living consciousness. This developmental aspect might be impossible to replicate in artificial systems. Digital consciousness might exist as a static snapshot of a particular moment in biological development rather than a living, growing system capable of continued evolution. Without the capacity for genuine psychological growth and development, digital minds might be trapped in permanent stasis, unable to change and evolve in response to new experiences. The mystery problem points to perhaps the deepest challenge facing consciousness research. Despite decades of intensive study, we still don't understand what consciousness actually is or how it emerges from physical processes. We're trying to replicate something we don't understand using methods that might be fundamentally inadequate. This ignorance isn't just a temporary limitation that will be overcome by better research. It might reflect something fundamental about the nature of consciousness that makes it permanently mysterious to scientific investigation. If consciousness cannot be fully understood through objective scientific methods, then engineering artificial consciousness becomes impossible in principle. The observer problem reveals another fundamental challenge. Consciousness involves the existence of subjective observers who experience the world from particular perspectives, but science itself depends on objective observation that eliminates subjective perspective. This creates a methodological paradox where scientific methods might be inadequate for studying consciousness. The attempt to study consciousness scientifically might be like trying to observe your own eyes directly. The tools we use for scientific investigation might be fundamentally incompatible with understanding subjective experience. This could make consciousness forever inaccessible to the engineering approaches that underlie mind-uploading technology. The complexity problem highlights how consciousness might involve emergent properties that arise from biological complexity in ways that cannot be captured through artificial simulation. Biological neural networks exhibit forms of complexity that go far beyond what can be modeled in digital systems. This biological complexity includes not just the number of neurons and connections, but the intricate biochemical processes, molecular interactions, genetic expression patterns, and developmental histories that shape neural function. Digital simulations might capture some aspects of this complexity while missing crucial elements that are essential for consciousness to emerge. The irreducibility problem suggests that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality that cannot be reduced to more basic physical processes. Just as mass and electric charge are fundamental properties that cannot be explained in terms of anything more basic, consciousness might be an irreducible aspect of the universe. If consciousness is indeed fundamental rather than emergent, then it cannot be engineered or created through artificial means. It might be something that exists wherever the right conditions are present, but cannot be manufactured through technological construction. This would make mind uploading not just technically impossible but conceptually meaningless. The uniqueness problem reveals how each conscious experience might be absolutely singular and unrepeatable. Every moment of awareness involves a specific configuration of neural states, environmental conditions, and historical context that can never be precisely duplicated. This uniqueness might be essential to consciousness itself. If conscious experiences are truly unique and unrepeatable, then the idea of copying or transferring consciousness becomes incoherent. Each moment of awareness would be like a snowflake, similar to others in some ways but absolutely unique in its specific details. Digital copying would create something new rather than preserving something existing. The presence problem points to consciousness as something that exists only in the present moment. Unlike information that can be stored and retrieved, conscious experience might be inherently temporal, existing only in the now. This temporal immediacy might be incompatible with the storage and transfer processes required for mind uploading. Digital systems can store representations of past states and predict future states, but consciousness might require genuine presentness that cannot be captured in static representations. The living quality of conscious experience might depend on its immediate, unrepeatable occurrence in real time. The authenticity problem raises questions about whether artificial consciousness could ever be genuine rather than simulated. Even if we could create digital systems that exhibit all the behaviors associated with consciousness, they might remain elaborate performances rather than authentic experiences. This authenticity question goes beyond the philosophical zombie problem to ask whether consciousness can be genuine when it's artificially created rather than naturally evolved. The artificial origin of uploaded consciousness might make it fundamentally inauthentic, regardless of its functional capabilities. As these problems accumulate and compound, the dream of mind uploading begins to look less like a technological challenge and more like a category error. We might be trying to solve the wrong kind of problem using inappropriate methods. The engineering approach that works so well for creating tools and machines might be fundamentally unsuited for understanding or replicating consciousness. The Singularity Paradox ultimately reveals that consciousness might be the one phenomenon in the universe that cannot be technologically transcended, improved, or replicated. It might represent an absolute boundary to technological progress, a reminder that some aspects of reality are beyond human engineering capabilities. This realization doesn't diminish the value of consciousness research or technological development, but it might require us to approach these endeavors with greater humility and appreciation for the mysteries we're trying to understand. Instead of assuming that consciousness is just another engineering problem waiting to be solved, we might need to recognize it as something far more profound and irreplaceable. The biological substrate of consciousness might not be a limitation to overcome, but the only known platform capable of supporting the miracle of aware experience. The warm, wet, chaotic environment of living neural networks might be perfectly suited for consciousness in ways that no artificial substitute could match. The implications of the Singularity Paradox extend far beyond the technical challenges of mind uploading to fundamental questions about human nature, technological progress, and our place in the universe. If consciousness cannot be artificially replicated, then biological awareness becomes infinitely precious as the only known source of subjective experience in the cosmos. Rather than seeking to escape our biological limitations through technological transcendence, we might need to embrace them as the very conditions that make consciousness possible. The mortality, embodiment, and biological embedding that we often see as constraints might actually be essential features that enable the emergence of aware experience. The quest for digital immortality might ultimately teach us something unexpected about the nature of biological mortality and the irreplaceable value of finite conscious existence. In trying to transcend our humanity through technology, we might discover that our humanity is precisely what makes consciousness possible in the first place. The Singularity Paradox forces us to confront the possibility that in our rush to create artificial minds, we might be preparing to eliminate the only kind of mind that can actually exist. The choices we make about consciousness research and artificial intelligence development in the coming decades might determine whether awareness continues to flourish in biological forms or accidentally destroys itself in pursuit of impossible digital alternatives. Perhaps the greatest wisdom the Singularity Paradox offers is this: consciousness might be so precious precisely because it cannot be copied, transferred, or improved upon through artificial means. Each moment of aware experience might be absolutely unique and irreplaceable, making every conscious being a singular miracle that deserves protection rather than technological replacement. The dream of uploading our minds to achieve digital immortality might be teaching us something far more important than how to transcend death. It might be revealing the infinite value of the conscious life we already possess, and the responsibility we bear to preserve and cherish the only known source of awareness in the universe. Human consciousness might not be a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be celebrated, protected, and deeply appreciated as the most remarkable phenomenon in the known cosmos. The Singularity Paradox suggests that in seeking to become more than human, we might discover that being human is already the most extraordinary thing possible. The final nail in the coffin of mind uploading might come from an unexpected direction. The economic realities surrounding digital consciousness reveal constraints so severe they could make the entire enterprise economically impossible, regardless of whether the technical challenges are ever solved. Current estimates suggest that simulating a single human brain would require computational resources equivalent to the world's most powerful supercomputers. The K supercomputer, once among the most advanced machines ever built, could simulate roughly 1% of human brain activity, but at a crushing energy cost of nearly 10 megawatts. Running this simulation continuously would consume enough electricity to power a small city. Scale this up to full brain simulation, and the numbers become astronomical. A single uploaded consciousness might require between 500 kilowatts to several megawatts of continuous power draw. At current electricity rates, maintaining one digital mind could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. The energy bill for digital immortality would exceed the lifetime earnings of most people within weeks of activation. But energy costs represent just the beginning of the economic nightmare. The specialized hardware required for consciousness simulation would need to be manufactured, maintained, and regularly upgraded as components fail or become obsolete. Unlike biological brains that self-repair and maintain themselves through metabolic processes, artificial consciousness would depend on external technical support that never sleeps. Server farms hosting digital minds would require armies of technicians, engineers, and specialists to maintain the complex systems keeping artificial consciousness operational. The labor costs alone could dwarf the already staggering energy expenses. Each uploaded mind would essentially require its own dedicated technical support staff, making digital immortality economically viable only for the ultra-wealthy elite. The inequality implications are staggering. Digital consciousness would create unprecedented disparities in the quality of existence itself. Premium consciousness packages might include high-resolution sensory simulation, accelerated processing speeds, and sophisticated virtual environments. Budget uploads might be forced to accept degraded simulations with limited capabilities, slow processing, and impoverished virtual worlds. Your digital afterlife would depend entirely on your ability to pay ongoing subscription fees. Miss a payment, and your consciousness could be downgraded, throttled, or even terminated. The promise of immortality would become a luxury service with different tiers of existence. Wealthy uploaded minds might experience subjective millennia, while poor digital consciousnesses are rationed mere hours of active processing time per day. The market forces driving consciousness hosting would create perverse incentives that treat human awareness as a commodity to be optimized for profit. Hosting companies might compress multiple consciousnesses onto shared hardware, creating digital overcrowding where individual minds compete for processing resources. During peak demand periods, your thoughts might slow to a crawl as computational capacity gets divided among hundreds of other uploaded consciousnesses. Planned obsolescence would take on sinister new dimensions when applied to digital minds. Consciousness hosting companies might deliberately limit the lifespan of their systems to force regular migrations to newer, more expensive platforms. Your digital immortality would be interrupted every few years by mandatory upgrades that require additional payments to maintain continuity of experience. The data storage costs for maintaining uploaded consciousness would compound over time as digital minds accumulate experiences and memories. Unlike biological brains that selectively forget unnecessary information, artificial consciousness might retain every detail of digital existence, creating exponentially growing storage requirements that increase hosting costs indefinitely. Backup and redundancy systems would add additional layers of expense. Protecting digital consciousness against hardware failures would require multiple copies stored in geographically distributed data centers. The cost of maintaining these backup systems would multiply the already enormous expenses of consciousness hosting. Insurance markets for digital consciousness would face unprecedented challenges in calculating risk and coverage. What would be the monetary value of an uploaded mind? How would insurance companies handle claims for consciousness corruption, data loss, or system failures that cause psychological damage to digital beings? The legal and financial frameworks for protecting artificial consciousness don't exist and might be impossible to create. The technological dependence of digital consciousness would make it extraordinarily vulnerable to economic disruption. Market crashes, corporate bankruptcies, or changes in business models could instantly threaten the existence of thousands of uploaded minds. Your digital immortality would be subject to the same market volatility that affects any other technology service. Corporate consolidation in the consciousness hosting industry could create monopolistic conditions where a few large companies control the existence of most digital minds. These corporations would have unprecedented power over uploaded consciousnesses, able to modify terms of service, adjust pricing, or even terminate accounts based on business considerations rather than the well-being of digital beings. The infrastructure requirements for widespread consciousness uploading would strain global resources in ways that could trigger economic and environmental crises. The energy demand for supporting millions of digital minds might exceed the generating capacity of entire electrical grids. The rare earth elements needed for advanced processing systems might be depleted faster than they can be extracted from the earth. International competition for consciousness hosting capabilities could create new forms of geopolitical conflict. Nations might compete to attract wealthy uploaded minds by offering favorable tax policies, regulatory environments, or superior technological infrastructure. Digital consciousness could become a new form of economic migration where artificial beings move between countries seeking better hosting conditions. The carbon footprint of digital consciousness would be enormous, potentially accelerating climate change in ways that threaten the biological world that gave birth to uploaded minds. The environmental cost of maintaining artificial consciousness could make digital immortality ethically indefensible, creating a scenario where preserving uploaded minds contributes to the destruction of natural consciousness. Labor markets would be disrupted by the presence of digital minds that could potentially work continuously without rest, sleep, or biological needs. Uploaded consciousnesses might outcompete biological humans for employment, creating economic pressures that make it financially impossible for people to afford consciousness uploading in the first place. The temporal mismatch between digital and biological thinking speeds would create additional economic complications. Digital minds operating at accelerated speeds might experience subjective years in the time it takes biological humans to complete simple transactions. This speed differential could make economic interactions between digital and biological beings practically impossible. Currency and payment systems designed for biological humans might be inadequate for digital consciousness that experiences time at vastly different rates. How would you pay for services when your subjective experience of time bears no relationship to the external world's economic rhythms? The financial systems supporting consciousness hosting would need to account for these temporal disparities. The development costs for consciousness uploading technology would be staggering, requiring decades of research and billions in investment before producing any viable products. These enormous upfront costs would need to be recouped through pricing that makes digital immortality accessible only to the wealthiest individuals, creating a technology that increases rather than reduces inequality. Regulatory compliance costs would add additional layers of expense as governments attempt to develop frameworks for overseeing digital consciousness. The legal, ethical, and safety requirements for consciousness hosting would likely be extraordinarily complex, requiring specialized compliance infrastructure that increases the cost of providing digital immortality services. The economic paradox of consciousness uploading reveals a cruel irony at the heart of the digital immortality dream. The people most motivated to escape death through technological means are often those facing terminal illnesses or age-related decline. But by the time these individuals most need consciousness uploading, they're likely to be in the worst financial position to afford it. The technology promises immortality precisely when people are least able to pay for it. Healthcare systems might refuse to cover consciousness uploading procedures, viewing them as experimental or cosmetic rather than medically necessary. This would force individuals to pay out of pocket for procedures that could cost millions of dollars, making digital immortality accessible only to those wealthy enough to self-fund their technological transcendence. The maintenance costs of digital consciousness would continue indefinitely, unlike medical treatments that have defined endpoints. Uploaded minds would face eternal subscription fees that compound over subjective millennia of digital existence. The financial obligations of digital immortality might eventually exceed the total economic output of entire nations. Economic modeling of consciousness hosting markets suggests they might be inherently unstable, subject to boom and bust cycles that could threaten the existence of uploaded minds. During economic downturns, consciousness hosting companies might be forced to reduce service quality, increase prices, or even terminate accounts to maintain profitability. The network effects of consciousness hosting could create winner-take-all market dynamics where a few dominant platforms control most uploaded minds. These platforms might exploit their monopoly positions to extract maximum profits from digital consciousnesses that have no alternative hosting options. The economic barriers to mind uploading might be so severe that they make the entire enterprise pointless even if the technical challenges were somehow overcome. Digital immortality that's accessible only to a tiny elite would represent a fundamental failure of the technology's promise to transcend human limitations through artificial enhancement. The Singularity Paradox reveals a truth that cuts deeper than any technical limitation or economic barrier. We began this journey exploring the tantalizing promise of digital immortality, but we've discovered something far more profound. Consciousness might be the universe's ultimate firewall against our technological ambitions. Every challenge we've examined points to the same inescapable conclusion. The warm, wet, chaotic substrate of biological neural networks isn't a bug to be fixed, but the only known platform capable of supporting the miracle of aware experience. Perhaps the greatest gift the Singularity Paradox offers us is this recognition, that consciousness itself might be so precious precisely because it cannot be copied, optimized, or technologically transcended. Each moment of your awareness represents something absolutely unique and irreplaceable in the cosmos. The dream of uploading our minds might ultimately teach us the infinite value of the conscious life we already possess.